Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk. Back again with you guys for another episode of our Let's Talk Arsenal series. Whilst we're going through what I'm describing as the honeymoon series, the series of pre-recorded episodes to go out every morning at 8 a.m. when I would usually be doing the live show, but I can't, despite every cell in my body willing me to try and do it. Even in Mauritius, I am not going to do it, and I'm instead going to try and continue a happy marriage. Today, I'm very happy to be joined by Andrew, aka Arseblog. How you doing, mate? You good? You well?
I'm good, thank you very much. It's a sensible decision not to broadcast live every morning while you're on your honeymoon. I can say that with
Yes.
experience. Not that I've tried, but I know what would happen if we tried. And congratulations on
Thank you.
your nuptials, and wishing you and your lovely lady a very happy life together.
I appreciate that. Yeah. I mean, if there was anyone else that could push the boundaries of podcasting into potentially, family honeymoons, potentially you would have been up there in my top three. But it's going to be strange not doing it. But I'm glad that there's going to be something, of course, for the listeners who, thank you for tuning in, by the way, are here and here for it. It's been interesting trying to come up with different topics for these shows, of course, because evergreen content, especially when we don't know when games are going to be happening, especially with postponements as they have been. One moment I was recording thinking the Brentford game wasn't going to happen. Now I'm recording knowing it is going to happen. Of course, this will go out after the Brentford game has taken place. So there's context to that. But what I thought would be quite a cool idea for us to sit down and have a chat about is kind of what I'm describing as the Arsenal end game, which is where is this going under Arteta and how does he take us to where we want that or where we potentially think it can be? So to start off, I want to kind of talk about how we got to where we are under Arteta, because when he took over and Arsenal were in 11th place in the league, Andrew, it was one of the lowest points I remember, to be honest, as an Arsenal fan. And to be honest, finishing in back-to-back 8th place positions, I don't think necessarily changed too many minds as to whether or not we were indeed moving in the right direction. So give me kind of your perspective of your feelings around that 18 or so months that led us to two back-to-back 8th place finishes and how you were feeling at the end of those seasons.
It's a weird one because I think everybody understood when it went wrong for Unai Emery that he was like the wrong guy at the wrong club at the wrong time. The way that the post-Wenger structure fell apart as well was not healthy, was it? With Gazidis leaving, Mislintat leaving, left Raul Sanyehi with a lot of power. And I don't know that he was, the right man to do the job that he was doing. And Mikel Arteta came in when the club was at a very low point. And I'm sure you remember, I'm sure the listeners remember as well, when we played Manchester City maybe a week or so before he was announced. I can't quite remember the time frame exactly. But it was a terrible Arsenal performance. We got turned over 3-0. City never had to get out of first gear. And you could see there were shots of Arteta on the bench, sort of looking around, looking at the team, looking at the state of everything and thinking, this is a big job. And to be fair, he said that when he came in. He talked about needing to change things, needing to change the culture, change how the everyone lives together, I think was the way he spoke about it. And I think if you go back in time and you said to people, this is going to be a long-term, medium to long-term project to get this club back to where it needs to be, I think most people would have said, yeah, it is. Yeah, it makes sense. We've tried the quick fixes. They even tried some quick fixes when Mikel Arteta was there. There were some signings that didn't make a lot of sense, and we maybe don't need to go over those to a huge extent. But it was obvious that this was something that was going to take time. The problem is, of course, is that like when you're a football manager, when you're a football club, when you're a club the stature of Arsenal, it's all well and good saying we need time. We need time to build this. We need a plan.
Yeah.
When you're losing games, when performances aren't good, when you're not scoring goals, when you're losing to teams you shouldn't lose to, when you get hockeyed by Liverpool or Manchester City, it's very difficult to maintain that perspective, isn't it? Because football, common sense will tell you it does take time to build things. But at the same time, you've got to go out on a Saturday or a Wednesday or a Thursday or whenever it is and keep the fans happy, because you don't get time unless you get results. So I think that's been the most interesting aspect of this, is that the knowledge that I think most people had that this was going to be something medium to long term, but the frustration of experiencing poor performances and bad defeats and league positions, which I don't think are befitting of a club like Arsenal.
Yeah, they wasn't, and I think as a fan as well, it's really hard to see that league position. But at the same time, even though the finishes weren't the best, you could clearly, I think, see what Arteta was trying to change. Do you think there was an element of Arsenal had been on a bit of a downward slope for some time, and it was about kind of not only just putting the brakes on, but as we know, when you put the brakes on a car, your car don't stop immediately. You know, it takes time before it comes to a stop, and
Yeah.
then you can reaccelerate again. And I felt as though those two eighth place finishes kind of could be summed up a bit like that, is that we were putting the brakes on this slope, but you're still going down that slope whilst you're braking. And the main kind of turn, I think, was when we had the summer of 2021, which was a recruitment drive, not of scattergunning players that we think would come in and immediately be a success, like you alluded to, and we've seen them in the past with signs like Willian, etc., that came in, and we thought they'd give us kind of an immediate boost. I suppose the signing of Aubameyang and us to a lesser extent, I guess, Lacazette as well, were kind of around trying to boosting those two positions key and responding to the exits of the likes of Alexis Sanchez, of course, too. But they were signings all under the age of 23 and under, with the idea of, I think Edu described it, of rebalancing the squad. When we had that summer, did that kind of set off a little bit of a light bulb in your head, or a little bit of a switch in your head thinking, okay, yeah, I can kind of see what the plan is now around the process to leading us back to where we want to be?
Yeah, like I'd be fascinated to know at what point that plan was come up
Yeah.
with, when they sat down and strategized and said, like, because clearly when they signed Willian, they must have thought maybe we can just give the team that little bit of a, whatever it
Yeah.
is, his experience. He won a lot at Chelsea, very experienced player. Really didn't work out for us. I think it was a terrible, terrible signing. And I don't know that you make a signing like that if in your mind the strategy is to buy young and develop a team. I think maybe that signing changed the way they were going to do things. I think you have to go back a bit because we look at that summer, and I think you're absolutely right to mark that down as the point where things began to change for the better, because they restored faith, didn't they, in their ability to recruit well, because it was shaken because we had too many signings that didn't really work out, too many short-term signings. But you look at those positions that they filled, you look at the age profiles of the player, et cetera, et cetera. We could all get behind that. They did restore some faith. So I do think that is kind of like a marker, but it's a bit down the line. What I think one of the challenges that he had to face was a dressing room that was very comfortable, perhaps overly comfortable, where there were some big personalities, where there were probably some cliques which weren't at all helpful. And I think you go back to the summer of 2020. Was it 2020 when lockdown started? It was, wasn't it?
Yes,
It
it
was
was.
summer of
Yeah.
2020 when lockdown started, right? So when we came back from lockdown and we saw Mikel Arteta put his foot down as a disciplinarian in the way that he dealt with Mesut Ozil. People will have their own opinions on that, whether they like it, dislike it, whatever it might be. But he was absolutely 100% committed to the decision that he made. And he felt, assured that he would have the backing of the club on that decision. Similarly, Matteo Guendouzi, a player who had disciplinary issues behind the scenes. People chalk it down to that incident with Neil Maupay in the Brighton game. It wasn't that. It was a collection of things. And he put his foot down again. And what he did, I think, was try and break up some of the cliques within the dressing room to change the culture, to ensure that the players he had were going to be on board with what it was he was doing. And I think that's management 101, isn't it? You go into any job, go into an office job and you're parachuted in as a manager or whatever it is. You're going to take a bit of time to see who's up to the job, who's not, who works hard, who's disruptive, whatever it is. I think it's football management 101. You go in and you say, well, look, actually, this guy's really talented, but, everything about him is a problem. And we've got to do something about that problem. And the nuclear option is you know, as you saw with Mesut Ozil, was to leave him out of the squad. And that's a huge decision, you know, particularly when Arteta and Ozil were former teammates as well.
Yeah.
You know, they won FA Cups together. You know, so I think you have to go back to that moment as like that could have been a make or break moment, you know, where player power could have triumphed as it has done in the past, but it didn't. And I think that gave him a measure of authority within the squad. Because I mean, if you're in the squad and you're thinking, well, look, if he can do that to one of the biggest names that Arsenal have had for so many years, then he could do it to me. He could do it to that guy. And I think it was it created still an unhealthy situation which went on for some time because Ozil was excluded, Guendouzi was excluded. I think Guendouzi went out on loan, didn't he? And then, you know, then Ozil wasn't named in the squad for the next season. And that was like, I mean, it was an unhealthy situation, but one where ultimately he came out on top. And I know people's mileage over Mesut Ozil will vary one way or the other, but I think you need to go back to that and say, okay, he was very clear, at least in terms of what he wanted from his players, what he demanded from his players. If you're not giving it to him, you're out. Simple as that. And, you know, when we think about the squad now and we think about the buy-in and when we think about the way the team, it feels very together, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I don't know that you get that without having to go through those difficult moments with a situation like the Ozil situation and other players like Mustafi, like Socrates, like Kolasinac, all gone, all part of that kind of clique, you know, experienced, Guendouzi not so much, but the others, you know, these experienced players who, you know, want to do things their way. And I think when you're a young manager in particular, it takes a lot of stones to do that. And I think that's quite an interesting marking point in where we are now. I don't think we would be where we are now without those tough decisions and those tough months.
Yeah, and I mean, Arteta to me feels like a manager that would be willing to, you know, fall on his swords. Like that's how he comes across to me. That he's so set by the kind of the principles that he has that he will, you know, that's what he's going to stick to. Yes, I still think that doesn't mean he can't learn as a coach. Doesn't mean he can't learn from errors that have been made, especially I think in the transfer market, potentially even on the field, you know. And as a coach is inexperienced, because he is inexperienced, this is his first job. He is going to have to be open to change and be malleable. But there are certainly these non-negotiables, as he established in his first press conference, that he has stuck by. And I think, you know, fair play to him. And I think that, as you alluded to a second ago, you know, we are where we are because of that. And that is really key.
I mean, it's quite interesting, Tom, just to sort of expand on this. I mentioned this on the podcast, but I was listening to Carlo Ancelotti's book about leadership recently. And one of the things that he talks about are non-negotiables, that you have to have respect. Like as a manager, you have to have respect from your players, and you as a manager have to respect your players as professionals, as human beings. But he makes it very clear that if you have got people in your dressing room who aren't going to be on board, then either you deal with it or ultimately you're going to be dealt with by the damage that may cause the team and everything else. So, you know, the non-negotiables thing is something that people talk about in relation to Mikel Arteta, but I think the phrase was coined, to my knowledge anyway, by Ancelotti. And people think about Ancelotti as a manager, you know, very calm, easygoing, affable guy. All the players love him. But when you've got to make a tough decision, you've got to make a tough decision. And you don't have the career and the success that Carlo Ancelotti has had without being able to make those decisions, as nice as you are, or as open as you are to making, you know, being in inverted commas friends with your players.
Yeah,
you've got to be able to do those things as well.
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, he was former teammates of Ozil. He still is a former teammate of Rob Holding in the squad as well. And that dynamic in itself was always something that, if you're coming in, you have to address absolutely from day one, because you can't have that sense that other players feel as though there's favoritism because you've played with them and, you know, you're going to give them more rope because they're an ex-teammate. And I think that he absolutely did end up dealing with that.
Did you see the comments? Sorry, I mean, did you see the comments he made about Hector Bellerin when Hector left? and he said,
when he had a conversation that they
yeah,
hadn't had since that they were teammates, sort of thing.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Like, and Arteta really took when Bellerin arrived, he took him under his wing, made sure he was settling in all right, brought him over to the house to make sure he got fed and all that kind of stuff. And they were friends. But
yeah,
the relationship changes when it's a manager-player relationship. And, I thought that was quite interesting. After Hector left, he said, I can have a conversation with him like I used to have, because you have to have a certain amount of distance. And that's got to be a tough thing to do. If you've got a relationship with somebody, like, tomorrow, someone who's your friend becomes your boss.
yeah.
I mean, that's a tough one, it
Yeah.
is a tough one for you, and for, if it was me and you, if tomorrow I become your boss, then it is a tough one, I'd be a
No
hard pass.
podcasting on the honeymoon. Rule 1.
Yeah, get your ass
Yeah.
off the beach and into the studio and do it.
Indeed. Yeah, look, I think that what we experience and have experienced since those decision-making processes is obviously a benefit from team harmony. We've seen the culture within the group change. We've seen the connection between the fans and the group massively improve. One of the shows we're doing over this series, I have a chat with Sophie and Kevin Campbell from the Highbury Squad about the evolution of kind of the Arsenal fan base's atmosphere around the club in the last few years. We go from kind of the lowest point we can remember to where we are now, which I look to as genuinely a peak that I can't remember until way back when, that we were winning things, and when I say things, I mean titles. So, it feels so different because of the decision making of Arteta in that sense. But kind of going back, I know I mentioned that the summer of 2021, but just before that point, there was for me a time where I can probably say, and I don't like the labels that we have with Arteta in and out and this stuff, but there was a time where I really didn't see a way forward for Arteta, which was after that elimination from the Europa League to our former coach Unai Emery. And of course, you're languishing and we're finishing outside of the European places for the first time in goodness knows how many years. And I'm looking at that and I'm going, if this is a process, where's it going? Is he capable of kind of achieving it? Let me ask you about kind of any doubts that you had during that moment. Did you have doubts? And were you ever tempted to think, oh, I'm not really sure this guy is the one that's going to bring us forwards?
For me, it was always about, I always liked the way he spoke. I like what he said. I like the way he talked about what he wants for the club. First and foremost, what does he want for the club? Like the standards that he wants to set at the football club. Like the mindset must be, we're going to win every game. Every single game we play, we are going to win it, and we're going to challenge, and we're going to try and win things and be successful. And I think, that's the way you've got to set up, right? That's the way you've got to set up as a coach. You've got to have that. And I think if you want to be a big club, you have to have that. You've got to be, you've got to be just laser focused on winning every single game, the next game, the next game, the next game. So when it came to talking about what he wanted to do and how he wanted to do it, I was always really on board. I was always really encouraged. I don't think it's unreasonable to say that, I think most people will have had a certain amount of doubt when we've had, poor runs of form, when games we should have won, maybe we overthought. You mentioned the Villarreal semi-final. Perhaps that's one of them. I know we did have some injury problems, but there you go. You finish 8th out of Europe. Of course, you have to have some doubts. You absolutely have to. But I think what was encouraging or interesting about that was, that's when that summer that you mentioned at the top comes in.
Yeah.
That's where they obviously sat down and thought, right, we've got to be smart about what we do and how we do it. And we've got to have some money to do it as well. And to be fair, the money has been there, quite a significant amount of money as well. So the backing that he got from the club, from the owners, from the board, however you want to call it, I think, in a situation like this, what do you do if you say you're on a medium to long-term project and you have faith in that, but like there are these stumbling blocks along the way? If you still believe that you're going to go where you need to go, it is maybe the toughest thing in football is to is to just stick rather than twist, because football clubs twist all the time. Fan pressure, media pressure, whatever it is, you know, and the owners or whoever's making the decision thinks, you know what, maybe we'll get another guy in. But to me, it always felt like Arteta was, like Emery was trying to, let me make an analogy. Arsene Wenger built an incredible sandcastle, and the tide came in, and Unai Emery was trying to salvage that sandcastle.
Yeah. I'm getting flashbacks to my youth all of a sudden.
Right in front of it,
Yeah.
but he comes in. You can't stop the tide. You just can't stop the tide. And the tide's gone back out, and Mikel Arteta is hopefully building a new sandcastle, but a little bit further back on the beach, one that might last a bit longer. So I think if you think about it from that perspective, you're asking a guy to, like you say, put the brakes on, halt a trajectory which was going downwards, and then level out, and then go back up again. And it feels, you know, we're very few games into this season, but it feels like we're going in the right direction. Like the trajectory has changed in terms of A, how we play, B, what we're capable of, and I suppose C, the expectations that people would have for this season based on what we saw from this team, an imperfect team last season, right? We all know it was imperfect, but it came very close to achieving something that everyone would have been really, really happy with. So now it's about, you know, maintaining that and keeping that trajectory going. And I think the fact that the club had so much faith in what he was doing and how he was going to do it, that was the thing that sort of, I won't say stopped me from tipping over the edge, but always, I was like a lifeline in a way where, you know, you can't be happy if you're Arsenal and you finish 8th. You just can't. But you know, it's going back to what I was saying at the start, that this is a medium to long term thing, and he changed a lot along the way, and I think most of what he has changed has been for the better, you know. And I think part of what my main concern was just the football wasn't really what I thought it was going to be. For a guy who was brought up at Barcelona, who played under Arsene Wenger, who worked with Pep Guardiola, it just wasn't quite what I wanted it to be from him. And I'm sort of happy now, because I don't think it's what he wanted either. He always said, like, we need to score 100 goals a season, whatever it is. He said, when we get the ball and we've got to make 100,000 passes in midfield, you know, control the games, be ruthless, be efficient. And I think we're more like that now than we were, you know, certainly 12 months ago. That's for sure. And,
yeah,
you know, 18 months ago as well, you know, definitely.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, there were games last season that we absolutely, you know, a season before that, or a couple of seasons before that, we don't pick up the points. You know, we lost too many games last season. You know, 13 is a lot of games to lose, and we need to. That's one of the key things, to turn those losses into draws, and then some of those draws into wins. And that's obviously just the natural way you're going to find progression up the table. But you know, I think that, as that brings kind of an end to the first half of this chat around how we've got to where we are now, the second half of the conversation for me is split into two parts, which is when talking about where Arsenal have to go somewhere, there's two aspects. There's the team, the players, the tools you have to work with, and then the person, of course, who's harnessing those tools. So let's talk about the team first, which I actually think is the easier conversation, ironically, because everyone loves transfers to an extent. We are talking about a shiny new toy in the team. We've managed to bring in, I think, some excellent players this summer, in Zinchenko and Jesus in particular. You know, Fabio Vieira looks like he's got the makings of someone who could be quite special, and I think Arteta was right to say that we should look forward to enjoy what we're going to see from him. And then you've got players, you know, like Turner and Marquinhos that are a squad, but, you know, Marquinhos looks to be exciting as well coming through. So we have this starting 11, which I think, if we think about what our best 11 is, it's the 11 that's taken to most of the games this season, when Partey and Zinchenko, of course, have been fit. The right back situation's up in the air a bit, but I don't mind that, because I think White's done fantastically well. There's a few great stats coming out about his season already. But when you're talking about kind of the end game, and I think, just to kind of level that out, is the end game has to be getting Arsenal back to winning Premier League titles, and, you know, into the Champions League and competing to try and win them. So when you look at that as the end game for what Arsenal is, and maintaining that, where does the squad need to be for you compared to where it is now?
Oh, I mean, there's a $64,000 question. I mean, look, the thing is, you just keep adding quality. You've got to add and develop quality in your squad. You've got to fill the gaps where there are gaps, where players are not performing. Thank you very much. On you go. We bring in somebody else who can. And I think we're seeing elements of that already. We lost 2 strikers last season. We brought in Gabriel Jesus. Big signing, has really changed the way we play and the way we can play. But maybe if you're looking for an end game, you look for another striker. With all due respect to Eddie, and I'm not writing Eddie off or anything like that, but you want as much competition as there is possible for places. I'm like you with the right back situation. I love Tomiyasu. Absolutely thought he was brilliant in the first half of last season. But Ben White has been great this season. At centre half, Saliba and Gabriel, great, well done. But we've got options as well. If one of them loses form, Ben White can come in, Tomiyasu can come back, Tierney and Zinchenko. I remember this time, maybe it wasn't this time last year, but there was certainly a point last season where people were talking about Kieran Tierney when Nuno Tavares came in and had a couple of good games, and people were going, "Oh, is this the end for Kieran Tierney?" Well,
we're so fickle, aren't we?
Yeah, well, that's it. I mean, it is the nature of football fans that as soon as somebody else comes along, it's sort of happening to an extent right now with Emile Smith-Rowe, because we've got some worries about him. With his injuries, right? Hasn't really played this season. Didn't really play a lot towards the end of last season. Still ended up with double figures in goals, by the way. But people are going like, "Oh, is he too injury prone? Should we cash in now?" You're thinking, just get the guy fit and bring him back into the squad, and it gives you more options. It's like you can use 5 substitutes. We're playing Europa League football. This is a fixture list which is going to be absolutely insane in October, and probably insane in the second half of the season as well. If Arsenal continue to go the distance in the Europa League. So we are going to need every single player that we've got. And, your favorite or his favorite or her favorite at some point is either going to need to sit down or is going to break down. And we're going to have to deal with that. We're going to have to use the full extent of our squad. So, you need more than 11 players, and you can love the starting 11 that we have, but be open to the idea that other players will contribute and have to contribute if we want to get to where we want to go. And I think that's then true for basically every position on the pitch. So we're talking about Tomiyasu and White for right back. Right. Replicate that at centre half. So it's Saliba and it could be Saliba and White, but it's Gabriel and who?
Yeah.
There's one. Zinchenko and Tierney, there's a brilliant one. Martinelli, Smith-Rowe, that's good. Partey and who? Yeah. Xhaka and maybe Vieira.
Maybe.
Martin Odegaard and Vieira's there. Bukayo Saka and who? So there are things that you can do with the squad to boost the depth and boost the quality, and I think that's what you've got to do. You've just got to keep building and keep building. There will be some natural attrition. There'll be some players who go, some players who don't make it. Maybe a player we don't want to leave all of a sudden wants to leave. They could have their head turned. This is another interesting aspect of getting good again that people have forgotten, is that when you're good, other clubs want your players. We're going crazy because we can't get rid of them. We can't even give them away. And it's frustrating for us, but wait for it. The shoe will be on the other foot at some point, because when you're good, when you're 20 years old and you're Gabriel Martinelli and you're, banging in 15 goals and getting 10 assists in a season, who wakes up? Bayern Munich, Real Madrid, Barcelona. Well, I don't know what Barcelona, they'll have to sell.
No one knows.
to make another signing. But this is what I mean. Yeah. Manchester City, these are things that we're going to have to deal with as well. But that's a better problem to have, I think, than the one, where you just can't get rid of players and you're giving them away and nobody even wants them. But that's what I mean. I think that's what we've got to do. We've just got to keep building and keep building. And I think maybe the last couple of windows have been very busy. When you think about, there was 6 players last summer, 5 players this summer. I think what you're looking to do now is 1 or 2 in a summer. but good ones, not squad players. Guys who are going to come in and be ready to go and hit the ground running. So I think that's what you do. And, to the club's credit, they've got to a point where I think they can do that. Whereas when you thought about the squad 18 months ago, before the end of, the 2021 season, when you thought about that squad, you could say, get rid of like most of them and just, start again, rip it all up and start again. Whereas now we're looking to add some turrets to the sandcastle.
Indeed, yeah, I'm loving this sandcastle analogy. It's going to keep going back. No, and I think there's another aspect I think as well is that we've gone through the players and we've listed off positions, but there are players in that we would say that we keep that probably will move on. Players at Liverpool, Coutinho, Suarez moved on despite them pushing towards Champions League and Premier League victories. Manchester City have seen players move on. Leroy Sané being a good example. So Arsenal will lose players I think that are in our starting 11 right now as we still try and progress. And I think ruthlessness is part of that as well. If you can recognize a better player than Thomas Partey, go out and get them. If you can recognize and get a better player than Tomiyasu or White at right back, go out and get them, because that's the way in which you go forwards. I mean, you think about how many players that we would have loved to have had in that Man City team from 3-4 years ago that they've gone, actually, no, we can find a better player than you. We can bring in a Joao Cancelo. We can bring in someone of that kind of ilk and be amazing. So yeah, we can have Gabriel Jesus, but no, we'll take Erling Haaland instead. And the fact that they can afford to let go of someone as good as Jesus, as we're recognizing, is kind of a representation of their level. So the second part, of course, of the end game is the manager, and he's, as I said, still inexperienced. He's only been in a first team managerial position for 3 and a bit years now. 2019 December, of course, when he came in. So
what for you? Not even 3 years. That'll be 3 years in December. What?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah. So I think that misconception, because this is his 4th season technically, because he came over in 2019-20, then you've gone through 2 full seasons, and now we're in his 4th season with the team. So it's easy, I suppose, to realize how little actually in terms of time he's been here. So if Arsenal are going to get to their end game, which is, as we say, is wanting to get back to winning these things, do you see a coach in Arteta being able to take us there? And if you do, what is it about him that you see in, and what is there still to kind of piece together the puzzle of Arteta to make him a manager capable of that?
I mean, that's such a difficult question because, it's so hard to predict, isn't it? It's so hard to predict what will happen in football. I think what you would say about Mikel Arteta is that he is unquestionably a fighter. He's been under periods of really, really intense pressure and scrutiny, and managed maybe by the skin of his teeth a couple of times to hang on, but he's hung on. And I think the elephant in the room is Man City, and maybe at some point in the future it might be Newcastle, depending on the money that they're going to spend. That as much as we want Arsenal to win the title, maybe we have to redefine what success is for this football club, because, like you say, we all love Gabriel Jesus because he's fantastic. But Man City have just gone out and replaced him with a machine that just scores goals. And they can spend in every position. I think what it is you've got to have the ambition. You've got to at least try and bridge that gap, as hard as it might be. Like, it's really difficult to see an Arsenal team under any manager that I can think of getting 90+ points.
When you look at Liverpool, though, I mean, you look at how Liverpool built under Klopp.
Sure. But I mean, Klopp had come to Liverpool on the back of many years of experience.
Yeah,
having won, like, I'm not saying it's exactly the same thing.
Yeah,
but winning the Bundesliga with Borussia Dortmund, when you're fighting with Bayern Munich every season, is kind of, I know Liverpool is a much more storied club than than Borussia Dortmund. They've won more in their history, but
contextually, it's quite
contextually, you're looking at he had to rebuild. He had to go in there and rebuild. One of his first. Did he come in at the end of his lose a European final in his first season? Was it?
Yeah, Sevilla, I think it was.
Yeah,
Wasn't it?
so to Unai Emery.
Yes.
So Emery's done for a few of them along the way. So to try and put that on Arteta or expect that from Arteta, I don't know. I mean, I hope so. I really do. I mean, I can see progress. I can see him learning. I don't think any manager I can think of in their first job has ever had so many things to deal with on the pitch and off the pitch than Mikel Arteta. And what a learning curve it is. And I suppose it will depend on how quickly he learns, how well he learns. I mean, he comes across as a smart guy, fairly self-aware, not at all blind to the challenges of the job. And I think that's probably the thing that gives me, the most hope is that he does know where we are. He does know where we want to get to as a football club. The question is, in the context of the modern Premier League, with what you're fighting against, is it possible to get there? Like, what would we be happy with, like 4 or 5 seasons in the Champions League? I mean, everybody would be happy with the Champions League now, but once you get in there, you want to get the next step. I want to see Arsenal win a title again really badly. It's been too long. And I feel maybe like we've got our best chance of getting there with this kind of a setup, whether it's Mikel Arteta or whether it's somebody else that takes it a bit further on. I don't quite know. You remember Liverpool finished second, wasn't it, under Brendan Rodgers?
Yeah.
There was Jurgen Klopp who came along then and True. I won't say applied the finishing pieces, but made them a much better team. Maybe it's a similar situation where Arteta builds something and somebody else then comes along and looks at Arsenal and says, well, this is a very attractive proposition. This is a nicely run club, good players, good quality, add a couple more and I could do, so maybe that's what it is. But I think for now, it's really about, do you feel confident that we can maintain the progress? And I think right now I do. Right now, I feel like this group of players, the staff, the manager, the fans, there's something brewing. There's something happening. We can feel it. There's something stirring within the collective. And I know not everybody's happy, but not everybody is going to be happy. That's just the way football works. I remember people when the Invincibles were drawing games, people were complaining, we're drawing too many games. I mean, that's as close to perfection as a football team you'll ever see, and still people were unhappy. So that's the human nature of football fans. So for me, really, it's like, if I thought about like Arsenal winning the title again versus what we've got to compete with to do it, I think I'd depress myself. For now, I think I need to just see the team continue its progress, continue its development, continue to grow together. It's still pretty young, this team. There are players who are going to get a lot better. And I think maybe now the biggest challenge we have isn't really thinking about winning the league. It's about making sure that these guys stay together and that the jewels in the crown, so to speak, are part of this project for years to come.
Yeah, absolutely. I find it really interesting when you brought up Rodgers, because so many people look at Arteta and go, oh, I can see the similarities between Klopp and Liverpool. But actually, when you consider it from the Rodgers perspective, there is a lot of similarities there as well. And I think that's going to be what defines Arteta. Is he Brendan Rodgers? Is he the guy that takes Arsenal to the step before the final step, final piece of the puzzle? Or is he Klopp? Is he the guy that comes in and takes Arsenal back to the top again? And that's an answer that we'll find out. But as you say, football is so incredibly difficult to predict. And that's why I'm so annoying when I ask those types of questions. But I appreciate you giving it your best shot. Andrew, thank you so much for your time this evening. I really appreciate it. As always, a genuine pleasure having a chat when you jump onto the channel. So do tell people where they can find you.
Arseblog.com. You'll find everything there, all the blog and news and podcasts and everything else, and Arseblog on Twitter. And I'm around. I'm around. I'm not on the beach in Mauritius, though. I can tell you that for sure.
Indeed, that's where I'll be. I hope that wherever you happen to be listening in the world that you've enjoyed this chat. If you have, do drop a like on the video, do subscribe to the channel, and do make sure you're subscribed, of course, to the Arsecast over on all of the audio platforms. You'll find them there. And join up as a patron. It's definitely worth it. Brilliant extra content as well. Absolutely. We will see you tomorrow morning for the next show, whenever this one goes out, in the order of which I haven't decided yet. But I hope you are enjoying the content and what's to come as well. I'll see you again very, very soon. And as always, up the Arsenal.